Welcome to the Relentless Redstorm, where debate becomes energy, energy becomes culture, and every fan has a voice. I'm Jason Safford, alongside my brother in the storm, Darrell Jazz Johnson. We bring you the pulse of New York, the pride of St. John's Red Storm, and the relentless heartbeat of Red Storm Nation. All right, today is not a recap. Today is a sense of validation, because what happened in Madison Square Garden and what happened on Saturday at Villanova has changed the category this team lives in. So let's talk about the infrastructure that is now existing in St. John's and the Red Storm. Let's get into it, Darrell. What did you see?
Well, I saw a team collectively show grit and pick up their leader. Zuby Ejiofor is one of three captains on this team, by far the best player. Well, maybe not by far, but he's the best player on the team, the leader of the team, the captain of the team, and he had a subpar game. And then they were down 15, and they could have, put it on Zuby's back to bring them back, which probably would not have happened. And it would have been another bad Big East loss at Madison Square Garden. But this team showed relentless effort, grit, determination in coming back. Obviously, two things can be true, and Seton Hall can play poorly as well. Shaheem Holloway talked about players cramping and this and that, but a great come from behind victory that has the ability to set the tone for the season. A couple of things that I've talked about before. The cauldron. The cauldron is coming together. Rick Pitino, in Rick we trust. One of the reasons why this team was ranked number 5 in the preseason poll was because of the talent assembled combined with the coaching prowess of Naismith Basketball Hall of Famer Rick Pitino. You trust Rick Pitino is going to have this team firing on all cylinders by late February, early March, which is what I have been saying for day one on our Relentless Redstorm podcast, and we could see it coming to fruition. And I asked Bryce Hopkins this. I didn't get a chance to ask Pitino, but your guy, Dylan Mitchell, someone who you've been singing the accolades of from day one, he has come in and changed this team in the starting lineup. Even moving to a point forward position, taking some of the strain off of Ian Jackson and Dylan Darling. That has made this team look closer to, they're not top 5, but they actually look like a top 25 team, and that's good to see. I was talking to someone whose name I will not mention, about how I felt about this team after the Providence loss. And it was a given, that, to me, at least, it was a given that this team was an NCAA team. But after that Providence loss, I said, wow, I don't even know if that's a given anymore. Obviously, I expected them to still make the tournament, but I said I cannot think of this as a given anymore. And he said, "Yeah, I pay attention to the KenPom and this and that," and they were actually a bubble team following that loss, because it was a horrible loss. But what we have seen from this team on the court, Rick Pitino on the sidelines, off the court, is make a change in starting lineup, an impactful change in starting lineup. This team is 5-0 since. I really like what I'm seeing. I believe again. I do not. I don't believe Final Four. Not going to take it that far. but I believe this is a second weekend NCAA team that would put St. John's in the Sweet 16. I can now see that again. I did not see it after the Providence game. I see it now. I see it now, and a lot is going to happen between now and then. They face UConn twice in February. We had a Big East tournament, um, but I can see that now, and I'm happy uh, that I can see clearly now.
That's a big statement. And to feed off of a couple of things that you talked about, this particular game I think was one of the most exciting games because Seton Hall represented the St. John's basketball team of last year in the way that they play, in the way that they defend, their tenacity, and the fans after the game flooded, the Facebook groups and talked about what an ugly win it was. And what was lost in that, again, to say that any win, is ugly is to defeat the purpose, of why, you're playing the game, because a win is a win. And credit to Seton Hall, they hunted stress. They owned the tempo for 33 minutes. St. John's did not blink. They were patient. They were calm, despite Zuby having a terrible game, getting into foul trouble because Seton Hall focused on Zuby. They made it, very difficult for Zuby to be able to do anything. The guards had a difficult time because they thrive off of being able to give Zuby the ball and he kicks it out. So Seton Hall made this game absolutely terrible for the normal St. John's rhythm and flow. Bryce Hopkins, Dylan Mitchell step up, realize that this game is going to be all about grit and determination, enforcing themselves on the Seton Hall bigs, being there even though Seton Hall was out-rebounding them in the first half, not giving up, going after the weak side, being able to hunt every loose ball, go after every deflection. You saw a level of determination, and really what you saw was a level of resilience that Rick Pitino has been attempting to get into these players all season long. And all season long, the code just was not being accepted by the players. They were not accepting the level of trust they have to give to themselves and each other in terms of commitment. And after the game, Rick Pitino talked about it in that he asked everybody on the team, what it was like, to play with Zuby. And, they all talked about the fact that he gives 100% effort on every play. And he basically said to them, I need 13 guys to play like Zuby. And you saw it in this game. They just absolutely were, giving their best effort. The shots weren't necessarily falling. The foul shots weren't necessarily falling for everybody. But they did not flinch. And I think that's the biggest point, that they had 4 games in a row where the shots were falling. They were doing absolutely terrific. From that Providence loss, they basically rebuilt around Dylan Mitchell being in the starting lineup and figuring out their offense in a way that, with him and Bryce bringing up the ball, giving it to Zuby, having him kick it out to the guards, everything was flowing. This game was different. Seton Hall's a very different team. And Big East basketball is all about this kind of tournament atmosphere in every game where it's a rock fight. You're just going back and forth on defense, hunting for loose balls, hunting for, the fouls where you can get them. And St. John's just absolutely showed the poise that is necessary to be a March basketball team. And the final point I'll make on that is that Pitino even presented them with, hey, you could treat this like, a March game and just pack it up and go home, or you can figure out how you're going to survive and be able to go on to the next round. So he was alluding to the NCAA tournament in this game to get his guys to understand that playoff atmosphere, it's one and done. You have to find a way to win, even if you don't have it, or you're going home.
Absolutely. And you touched on Zuby. I will say this. One of the reasons why I thought this was a dangerous game was because of the talented bigs. And what's it? Payne the third. Thoroughly outplayed Zuby. Grabbed 15 boards. And I think I joked with you about this in one of the Facebook groups where Tino said he needed 15 Zubies. I said I need a Zuby offensive rebounder on the defensive boards because he had four of each. And in my humble opinion, that's not going to get the job done when you're playing in the NCAA tournament, whereas Dylan Mitchell has helped tremendously. He is the team's leading rebounder since he's been inserted into the starting lineup, is the team's second leading rebounder overall. Zuby just can't be a great offensive rebounder. He needs to be a at least a good to very good rebounder, and he is not that because of his weakness on the defensive boards. And I suspect that will eventually show up at a situation that will not be beneficial to the team. But there's still time for Pitino to work on this cauldron. But again, the grit and determination of this team, and going back to comments you made on the first few Relentless Redstorm podcasts that we did, the energy that Dylan Mitchell brings in the game, it's infectious. So you have the energy of Zuby combined with the energy of Dylan Mitchell. Their teammates feed off of that. Energy is obviously something, even scientifically, it's something that spreads. So now you have two energetic guys on the offensive end who help energize their teammates. So we have seen this team go 5-0. I talked about this team being able to run the table after that devastating Providence loss, and it appears got the biggest games out of the way. At Villanova was a tough one. Seton Hall at the Garden, as we saw, down by 15. That was a tough one. They got through both of those. There's no reason Rick Pitino should not pick up his 900th win on Saturday against his son, Richard Pitino. Wouldn't put it past Rick to have planned it that way, but I'm not going to accuse him of that. But the ultimate orchestrator from the sideline, it would be nice to get number 900 against my son. So he passed Bobby Knight. He tied Bobby Knight on Tuesday. Rest in peace to the legendary coach Bobby Knight. But he tied Bobby Knight with 899, has a chance to pick up 900 on the road. Red Storm are undefeated on the road in the Big East, only one loss to Providence. They should be able to pick that win up. And I'm sure all of the family will be there because either dad gets win number 900 or son stops dad from getting win number 900, which would be a huge win for Xavier program and Richard Pitino. So either way, big game on Saturday, but one I expect St. John's to win. They closed the month out strong. And then who knows? I mean, at this point in time, I would love a split with UConn. We win here, they win there. Um, if we're looking at odds, I'm sure UConn will be favored in both games, but this team is playing better. One thing I will add, Ian Jackson. And I've been talking about this since the beginning of the season. I think confidence is so important in a player. Um, and not everyone can play well off the bench. I think Pitino pulling him out of the starting lineup so early in the season, whereas he had hoped it would be a form of motivation, it seems to have just derailed his entire season. This is not the guy who was early in the season projected to be a lottery pick. He's a shell of that player. That's hurting him outside of St. John's, and it's hurting the St. John's Red Storm. But there's still time to even fix that. So I'm hoping that Pitino can find the perfect places to get him the ball, get him his confidence back, and again, have this team firing on all cylinders late February going into the Big East tournament and then the big tournament.
You bring up a great point, and Pitino actually talked about that in the post game conference. He actually recognized for the first time all season that Ian really is being given a huge assignment in the transition to point guard because that's what they need. You know, he recognized that Ian is a wing. He's a shooter. He likes to, get the ball in the position to be able to score. And he's really, shouldering a great load in learning the point guard position, but he's going to be better for it. And I actually said that on this show earlier, and I've sort of alluded to that several times over the course of the last month, that I think Ian is, his stock is going to rise just because of the, learning of the assignment and having to learn the game from a different position, because he has a tremendous basketball IQ. And you could just see it. There's natural talent, but there's also basketball IQ. And Ian Jackson demonstrates, although he, had a difficult game against Seton Hall, and that's something that, is noticeable, that he doesn't do as well against smaller guards that are scrappy, like a Dylan Darling. Ironically enough, Dylan Darling had a phenomenal game because he went up against Adam Clark, Bud Clark, who they're similar in size and tenacity, but Dylan just absolutely was relentless. He was the epitome of what Rick Pitino looks for in those types of players, giving it his all on every play. He made some huge plays. He, gives Rick Pitino a lot of pride because even though he's not the top tier guard that everybody was hoping for coming from the Big Sky, he is definitely showing his ability and tenacity, which is what's needed, especially in the Big East during the regular season. And I think he's going to be a factor, going into March. And he may even, be a huge factor in how this team goes and progresses through March. That being said, there is no doubt and no question that Ian Jackson is a superior talent, and he's playing out of position and really having to learn this. So I think Rick Pitino acknowledged that for the first time and even wanted the press to understand that this was not a game that he expected Ian to play a lot of minutes or do well, and he did not put the blame on Ian. That being said, a couple of things that I want to point out, and I want to ask the listeners for their opinion. Drop your take, no fence sitting. Give us your opinion on whether this was a survival win or a season-defining win. Whether or not you think that Ian is, more of the talent that we have the opinion that he is, or if you think, Darrell and I are just blowing smoke. But that being said, the difference between where St. John's was a month ago and where St. John's is today has everything to do with mindset. And absolutely Providence shook everything up, including Rick Pitino. And that transformation was about inserting Dylan Mitchell into the lineup, which, again, last year it was the same thing with Kadari Richmond. People forget that Kadari did not start most of the beginning of the season. He came off the bench. Rick blamed it on his lack of being in shape and also just dealing with the new offense and having to learn. However, the team transformed dramatically once Kadari was entered into the starting rotation. Now you have Dylan Mitchell. And from the beginning of the season, I said it. He is a natural talent and phenomenon. And the motor, the tenacity, and the willingness that this guy demonstrates on every play. You saw it in the Villanova game, actually more than you saw it in this game. The difference between the Villanova game and this game was that he had to become the scorer because everybody else wasn't scoring. And he was the last option, but he was, making his shots, including a beautiful, fadeaway jumper that is not his strength. But I think Pitino is working with him on this, getting him to the point where he's filling in the role that R.J. Lewis had last year with that mid-range jumper. And the difference is that R.J. was the first option last year. Dylan is the guy who shows up when everybody else is not being able to make, their game work. And that's what came out of this Seton Hall win, was that Seton Hall is not getting the credit they deserve for how well they played this St. John's team. And Dylan Mitchell was the X factor. They didn't have an answer for him. He scored 17 points. He had 8 or 9 rebounds. Actually, I think he had 10 or 11. I think it was a double-double. And it was Bryce Hopkins who had 13 and 8. But both of those guys showed up in a way that they, really didn't get the opportunity to in other games, in terms of driving to the basket, drawing contact, making Seton Hall work where they were making St. John's work in the first half. In the second half, St. John's basically just switched it on Seton Hall and said, okay, we're going to play the game your way and we're going to play it better. So that, I think, is one of the credits to what this team has become and their ability to dig in deep and now trust each other. And Rick Pitino even said it. In order for them to win that game when they were down 15, he said, you got to forget about the scoreboard. You have to treat it like you're down by 2 or 3. And this shot is going to make the difference, and you have to get the stop. So that was what happened in the last 7 or 8 minutes, was you saw St. John's just focus on stopping Seton Hall every play they could and otherwise working for a great basket. And they just dug themselves out of that hole one basket at a time. And that really was the momentum that everybody, when it got down to 7 and then 5 points, you heard the crowd get into it in a way that they weren't into it all game. And then when they took the lead, it was a completely different story. The crowd was absolutely phenomenal in that last couple of minutes that St. John's had the lead. And every play, especially the Dylan Darling steal, you just heard the roar of the crowd, which is, one of the most electrifying things about Madison Square Garden, is when that crowd gets into the game, they really are the sixth man on the floor.
I believe the crowd was the X factor in this team getting the victory. In the Facebook groups, I heard some people trying to knock the crowd, and for the couch coaches and experts, you cannot judge a crowd from your television set. Impossible. So if you want to knock the size of the crowd, that's one thing. You can't judge the energy of a crowd from watching TV. That's something you have to be in the arena to feel. And the crowd definitely got behind this team once they started playing better. Why should the crowd be loud when they're down 15 points, when they're laying an egg? Why would you cheer? But when the team came back and started coming back, that crowd got back into it. That crowd got back in the team. And uh, if you were to give a game ball, if you were to give three game balls out, Dylan Mitchell, Dylan Darling, and the St. John's fans at Madison Square Garden, the crowd was definitely instrumental in that victory. Jason, what are your thoughts on the next two games on the St. John's Red Storm schedule, and going into the month of February? Because I talked about the ability that this team had to close out the month undefeated. They're on the cusp of doing that. But tell me what you think about closing out with the last two games of January and then going into February.
I'm glad you asked that, Darrell. And one of the things that I want to point out is that you're coming off back-to-back victories in which Villanova, St. John's closed. The first time all season you saw them close in an effective, efficient, and just a manner of execution that's necessary for this team to thrive in March. Then you see them come back from an outstanding deficit built by Seton Hall that, as Rick Pitino says, being down 15 to Seton Hall is no easy task to come back from. Now they're going to Xavier in Cincinnati. 900th win opportunity for Rick Pitino against his son Richard Pitino. I absolutely think that based on Providence, it was set up this way. Look for the players to be motivated in a way to be a part of this 900th win, and that's the opportunity for them. I am absolutely sure. I've got to say this. Steve Masiello gets so little credit as the first assistant coach for St. John's. If you see this guy on the sidelines during the game with a laptop talking to the players, making adjustments for them as they come out of the game, as Pitino does the subs, this guy is absolutely a class act to watch in terms of how he gets into the players' heads and gets them to understand how to make the adjustments in game action. That is an incredible talent. So kudos to him. I don't, give a lot of credit to the St. John's, staff, because I, write about Rick Pitino as the overall leader. But he has an absolutely terrific staff in what they have done with this team all year long. We would have liked to see the team emerge a lot sooner and a lot faster, but credit to them in how they're building this team. So the game against Xavier has a lot of incentive and motivation behind it. Now, I will say this. Pitino's absolutely right. Xavier is going to give them problems. Xavier has been the X factor in the Big East. They were not expected to do well, just like Seton Hall was, because it's Richard Pitino's first year. But he has that team playing really, really well. They can absolutely challenge St. John's. St. John's has the ability, they have the talent, and truthfully, they seem to really take it on the road with them. So I think that they should absolutely, come out with Rick Pitino's 900th win. Great game. I fully expect that it's going to go down to the wire. It's probably going to be decided somewhere around 7 to 10 points, my expectation. And then you come back home to Butler. And remember, St. John's came out of that loss from Providence, and their first opponent was on the road against Butler, and everybody was terrified knowing how well Butler plays at home. Now Butler's coming back for retribution. I think, again, this is going to be an absolutely phenomenal way to end January. And, if St. John's, plays the way we fully expect them to do, and now they have that balance of being able to close and come back, I think that they should absolutely have a great game against Butler, setting themselves up for that UConn matchup that everybody is just licking their chops, waiting to see what that game is going to come out like.
Absolutely. It's been a while since we'd have to go back to I'm not even going to say Kentucky. We'd have to go back to Las Vegas the last time that St. John's faced a super elite team. Um, and with UConn being in the top five pretty much all season, they do have one loss, so maybe they dropped out of the top five briefly. And I believe they're number two. It's been a while since St. John's has had an opportunity like this, and they're going to have two. Um, with the first one being at Madison Square Garden on February 6th, I believe. Um, I believe that if St. John's can close out the month of, well, I think if they pick up the victory over Xavier on Saturday, I think they will be somewhere between 20 and 25 on Monday's AP poll. Pay more attention to the AP poll than I do to the ESPN poll, ESPN coaches poll. But I think they will be back in the top 25. And then, a win over UConn would catapult them. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Still have business to take care of with Xavier, then Butler, and then DePaul. DePaul on the road, which is the ultimate trap game.
Absolutely.
Going to Chicago to play DePaul, who you beat fairly easily here in New York. Well, they're in New York. I'm actually in Las Vegas right now. And, you're like, okay, we got UConn on Friday at MSG. It's going to be a great atmosphere. And then you show up and give a lackluster performance in DePaul and you lose that game. So they have to protect against that. But I would love to see and set up for this team to go into the UConn matchup with a 8-game winning streak.
Yeah, I would absolutely expect that DePaul would be the one game that could be suspect because you said it right. It is the ultimate trap game, especially how St. John's is playing. Now, I will say this, that they have the attitude, in addition to the momentum, to be able to absolutely go through the rest of the season as a steamroller. And I think that's what every St. John's fan is looking for and feels right now. But you never know game to game because it's what the other team comes with. Seton Hall did not get enough credit for how well they played. And it's very funny because I got to give a shout out to Brian Pizarris, who's one of the contributors in the St. John's Redstorm fans group. In fact, Brian, is on most of the St. John's groups. But he said there is no such thing as an ugly win. In fact, all wins are beautiful. And the comments that he got from that, he stated this is New York City basketball, Big East basketball, Rick Pitino basketball, and winning basketball. And that's exactly it. And he got a lot of sort of feedback to his post that was very funny to me because one guy actually said it best. He said Seton Hall played ugly, and that's why St. John's won ugly. And that has a lot to do with Big East basketball in general. Why I say that, I love watching the Big East more than any other conference because every game feels like a tournament game. it is literally possession to possession. These guys dig at it, and one of the things that you're seeing with this St. John's team is they're beginning to elevate. They did it last year. This is the difference between Rick Pitino and a lot of other coaches out there, why he's a Hall of Famer going for his 900th win on Saturday. He gets his teams to elevate. He makes them understand in the early season that you've got to figure out assignments, you've got to understand, and it becomes repetition to the point where when you get into the second matchup, so going into Butler as the first time they're going through the cycle, with some of the teams in the Big East, you're going to see, okay, we played these guys, in their home court a certain way. Now we have to see how they're going to come at us in our home court. And how are we going to have to make the adjustments? And so I say all that to point out that what Seton Hall did was force this team to make dramatic adjustments through the course of the game. And to the point of your comment about Dillon Mitchell, the difference between Zuby Ejiofor and Dillon Mitchell is that Zuby is just a straight up workhorse. He is a Clydesdale that you feed the ball on offense, and on defense you look to him to just be the stalwart defender. Dillon has that energy and motor to basically cover the weak sides, to be everywhere where nobody expects him to be. And when Dillon is at his peak performance, you see him making a play on defense, taking the ball down the court and making a play on offense, and immediately getting back and making another play. This guy is the ultimate two-way player where he doesn't need to have a jump shot because he can make so many things happen in transition. He scored 17 points basically in transition. And that's what this guy gives this team and allows them to be able to play in totally different ways that they're not usually set up to play. So St. John's, with Dillon Mitchell in the starting lineup and just Dillon Mitchell in general, to me has such a capability that a lot of other teams don't have. And now you look at it as, how can you get Ian Jackson and Osiah Sellers to now feed off of Dillon the same way they feed off of Zuby? Because that's the difference that happened with Seton Hall, was that everybody was sort of jumbled up because they're all used to feeding off of Zuby, and Dillon was the one who was basically like, I'm going to take the ball and just run with it and make the plays that need to be made because nobody else is making the plays.
Funny that you mentioned the definition of ugly losses from that fan's perspective. And I actually pushed back a little bit on that in his comments. I'm like, if these great coaches can say a team that I coach can win ugly, then there are ugly wins. There are also pretty losses. For example, the Iowa State loss, and Iowa State lost recently, but when you were right there with a team that, was top 5 in the country, that's a pretty loss. So I think they're definitely ugly wins, and they can be pretty losses. I want to read one comment. I took a screenshot of this because it was hilarious. Ian Lang wrote, stolen from my friend, but while Prey plays extremely hard, he's so uncoordinated and awkward. It looks like he's playing in clown shoes and oven mitts. I laughed when I saw that. It's not nice. No, Ruben, you do not look like you're playing in clown shoes and oven mitts. But sometimes he does look uncoordinated. And that's an exaggeration of how he looks. But and we've talked about this before when we were talking about the potential of Rick Pitino shaking up the starting lineup. The two people that we pointed to were Dylan Mitchell. I think you more so pointed to Dylan Mitchell. I brought up Ruben Prey to bring more size into the game, and he has affected the game with his size on the defensive at the rim. Because he is an impediment to going to the basket, not getting enough rebounds, in my opinion. But he also is big that can spread the floor, which is a unique aspect to have on the offensive end of the floor. And Ruben brings that. My final comment will be I love the way the cauldron is coming together. We're going to see, hopefully, this team go into that UConn matchup with the 8-game winning streak. After Pitino gets 900 against his son on Saturday, then 901 at the Garden against Butler, then 902 against DePaul in Chicago.
All right, you heard it here. Darrell making some bold claims on St. John's future right now. A new file is open, one marked ceiling, marked expectation, and marked for March. Subscribe, join the debate, and until next time, stay focused, stay fiery, and stay relentless.